This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, I'm definitely getting better at not peeking the mic. It's the subtle adjustments that matter. What's going on, everybody? I've been spending the last 15 minutes trying to play around with a mic setup. I think I found one that works, but it's still janky AF. I've been noticing a lot of mic peaking in some of the more recent episodes, and for whatever reason, the pop filter function on iMovie doesn't really do a whole lot. I've tried messing around with the filters, and I mean, you get what you get with free editing software. I'm not plunking more money into this than what's really worth investing these days. All in all, it was just kind of a hectic morning. Plus, I had a nosebleed, which was fun. But, you know, the usual interruptions, trying to do things, and you get sidetracked because of real-world problems. But nothing out of the ordinary there. All of that is a promising start for how the remainder of the podcast is going to go. But that's how we like to keep things on the FSWR channel. Raw. Organic. Just like Monday Night Raw. Actually, I think Raw is still giving it too much credit. They ought to just start calling it Monday Night Dry. Good Lord. One of the best choices I ever made was deciding that subjecting myself to 3 hours of uninspiring bleak television just wasn't worth it anymore. And I haven't looked back since. Not a Monday night goes by in my life now where I think, man, I wonder what's going on USA Network right now. I wonder what match is happening on Monday Night Raw in 2023. That thought has never crossed my mind. Now I've just substituted that for watching mostly 4 hours of bad modern wrestling every week. 2 hours of Dynamite and 2 hours of SmackDown. Both of which are bad for entirely different reasons. We'll get to the WWE content this weekend because, well, in case any of you forgot or just didn't know, it is WrestleMania weekend. And after my card preview / rundown on the Monday show, I think I kind of shed some light on the fact that there's really not a whole lot I'm expecting with that program. It's a program. Premium live event, I guess you could call it. Kind of like how I don't have much in the way of expectations for AEW, but, well, I don't want to immediately get off on bad footing because you know me. Always trying to keep things positive on the FSWR channel. Just the way we like it. So this was a pretty interesting week to be covering AEW. Mostly in the sense that there was basically one thing I was looking forward to. Initially, I had thought that one thing wasn't even going to be happening on the regularly scheduled Dynamite program. They did wind up tormenting me with 2 hours of filler content in order to get to the actual item of interest. But it was good to know that this was actually taking place on the show instead of their 3rd-hour extension. And by that, I mean the debut of their all-access thingamabob. Because, you know, that's what AEW really needs is more content. Because they don't already drive off enough viewers from a week-to-week basis. So at that point, logic dictates, let's add more shit. Surely the people will stick around long-term for this experiment. a piss-poor reality-based program. Yeah. Because AEW already doesn't do a good enough job exposing the business on their regularly scheduled TV show. Just, let's add a third hour and have the guys talk about behind-the-scenes stuff. Just more of a way to air dirty laundry and shed light on the reality that this business has been completely neutered. But yeah, more content. I have not checked the ratings for that All Access show. I have no idea how the numbers did. Judging the way most things go with AEW, I presume the hardcores invested their time in it, but you really think any casual viewers stuck around afterwards to check that show out? Highly doubt it. They already got run off by the time the main event came around anyway. Just more excuses to keep piling up more stuff for people to watch. But they really do think that people are going to invest in it. Remember when they said the same thing about Rampage? How long did that take before the bloom was off the rose? A month? Whatever. I don't want to get ahead of myself. I'll save more of that analysis for when we actually talk about the match. The actual Dynamite show began this week with Jungle Boy Jack Perry versus Matt Hardy. And as of this current recording, I still have no idea if I'm supposed to call him Jungle Boy or Jack Perry. They've been interchangeably going back and forth with it since JR kept calling him Jack Perry in like 2019. And God, people used to get so bent out of shape about that. It was kind of funny. Now they're basically just owning it and saying, fuck it, call him Jack Perry now. He beat Christian Cage at the last pay-per-view, so I guess he's all man now. Puberty finally hit the young chap. He ditched the dinosaur and the midget. He's ready to grow up and perhaps sprout a chest hair or two. If he's lucky. Actually, I think Jungle Boy already has chest hair. Well, I killed my own joke, didn't I? What the hell were we getting at here? Oh yeah, the match. With Matt Hardy. Yeah. Think that was the main takeaway from all of it. It's Jungle Boy versus Matt Hardy in 2023. More accurately, Matt Hardy is still a thing in 2023. The last time I was captivated by anything in a wrestling promotion involving Matt Hardy, it was... Well, I think I rest my case. The fact that I can't even think of anything off the top of my head, that pretty much says it all. I mean, the match was okay. Just okay. I still have no explanation for anything that is currently happening with Matt Hardy and Ethan Page. Whatever the fuck is going on with that Firm group. I mean, after Hook killed Stokely Hathaway last week in that no DQ match, I was kind of hoping that was a way they could just write off this entire faction and kind of pretend none of it ever happened. I'll give him this. Tony apparently heard my bitch on last week's Dynamite report, where I complained that after they did that promo segment with the 4 pillars 2 weeks back, last week's Dynamite didn't even have 3/4 of the guys that were involved in that promo, one of those aforementioned guys being their world champion. At least they were smart enough to book Jungle Boy in a match this week. And it was a singles match instead of a stupid 6-man like they did with Darby. But again, he's wrestling Matt Hardy. And with Matt, what you see is what you get. You know, he obviously doesn't move as well as he once could. That's to be expected. But, I mean, I don't want to get off on a 30-minute tangent about Matt Hardy's run in AEW, but, I mean, come on. Has anybody really been that enthralled with anything this guy's done? At least from an on-screen perspective. Does anybody really clamor to see Matt Hardy wrestle anymore? Or do you just kind of groan every time you see the guy on camera? Because when I saw this opening match was him and Jungle Boy, I was like, really? They're still trying to go with the Matt Hardy experiment? Haven't we already kind of established that this hasn't worked? Why is this guy still wrestling on TV? Because he's a name? Okay, but again, are people actually tuning in to see Matt Hardy wrestle anymore? The answer is no, they're not. I mean, I could sit here and nitpick some shit I hated about the match. The spot where Matt Hardy gave Jungle Boy the side effect on the floor. Then how it just led to them doing more shit 20 seconds later after this probably would have been done as an injury angle once upon a time. Back when smart people were in the business. I also like the WWE Light split screen where they show Darby Allin and Sammy Guevara observing the monitor in the back. But of course, they can't just watch the monitor. We also have to see them view it from a side angle so that we, the audience, can see their facial expressions. Or in the case of Sammy, watching him make out with his wife. Conveniently at the point that they showed the camera filming them on screen. But you know, those two are sucking face so often. I mean, I could actually buy those two just make out nonstop 24/7. Getting back to the match, though. They build to a finish where Ethan Page keeps getting on the apron to try and run distractions. Of course, it's all right in front of Aubrey Edwards, and naturally she just stands there with her hands on her hips and gives them the disappointed auntie look. And that brings down Hook, so he and Page can fight off to the back, which apparently is the new Cornette jingoism that we all like repeating. They fought off and disappeared, never to be seen again. Probably just walked off to grab a cup of coffee or something and hash it out over conversation. Meanwhile, Jungle Boy and Matt are doing some more stuff in the ring for a couple minutes until Jungle Boy caught Matt with like 97 moves in a row, and finally he beat him with a clubbing elbow to the back. Can't remember who else used that finish. Somebody in WWE is using that running elbow spot as a finish right now. The name's escaping me because I have Alzheimer's. Regardless, that move, Jungle Boy won with that. But all that got quickly put on the back burner so a real star could come out and bring back some energy and life to this segment. Here comes MJF. And he's out to provide a little bit of a retort to Jungle Boy's promo from a couple weeks back. MJF remembered a few things that stuck in his craw, and it's been brewing over the last couple weeks. When Jungle Boy told him that he's had it super easy in AEW over the last 3 years, well, he's exactly right. All MJF literally has to do is show up to the building, barely wrestle, admonish the fans and call them a bunch of hacks, walk to the back to pick up his paycheck. That's basically it. But when Jungle Boy mentioned their bout from Double or Nothing 2020, by the way, a match that I have zero memory of ever happening, but, you know, scamdemic era of wrestling, don't really have vivid, clear memories of a lot of shit that happened during that period. But after that match, Max walked to the back and found Jungle Boy to shake his hand, because for the first time in his life, MJF had thought that he finally found his equal. And this is great. MJF goes, "After I shook your hand, do you remember what it was I said to you?" And there's a momentary brief pause. And at this point, you audibly hear one guy in the crowd shout, "You suck!" And if you actually listen back to it, you can hear a handful of people laughing in the arena. That was fucking awesome. But no. Turns out Jungle Boy remembered exactly what MJF said. And all it basically boils down to is the fact that Jungle Boy is too nice. He always tries to be the good guy. And it's really never going to get him anywhere in the business. Sure as shit, here we are 3 years later, and we see that MJF was proven exactly right. MJF is the AEW World Champion. Jungle Boy is a cog in the wheel. He's a dude on the roster that hasn't grown one iota as a talent or well-rounded, versatile superstar. He's the same indie goofball he's been since he was hanging out with Dino Douche and Dwarf Dongsucker, or whatever Max called them. Marco Stunted Growth. Another classic corny one-liner. Oh, God. Someone ought to be paying him royalties. And of course, Jungle Boy tries to light a fire under MJF. Says he wishes he could be a narcissistic piece of shit like Max, but it's not part of his personality. Or lack of said personality. But he says he's going to do things his way, and when Jungle Boy finally becomes champion, he can proudly wake up the next day and look at himself in the mirror without loathing his reflection. And MJF basically just cuts his balls out from under him and tells him, "Good job, bud. Only took you 4 years to learn how to cut a halfway decent promo, but here's basically the truth. You're weak, spineless, a complete waste of financial investment, and according to your girlfriend Anna Jay, weak between the knees." And that little stinger prompted Jungle Boy to take down MJF and start pounding away on him before he tried to set up Max for a running knee. But Max took the powder, managed to escape, all the while still wearing the belt around his waist, which is quite impressive. And, well, look, there's plenty I could say about the idea of this feud. I know they're trying desperately to build up as many babyface challengers as they can for MJF because there basically are none. But even in trying to view this objectively, taking away my personal opinions on Jungle Boy and the way he's been neutered in the booking department over the last couple years, with the way they're having MJF essentially say the quiet part out loud, exposing Jungle Boy out in the open for basically not living up to the hype, now that we've kind of learned he's a one-dimensional, uninspiring cesspool of dreck, what's going to happen when they eventually feed him to MJF? Does anyone actually buy that Jungle Boy is beating MJF for the AEW World Championship? I hope not. You'd be a fool to think so. Tony would be a fucking idiot to have MJF drop the belt to this guy. So again, it all goes back to the question of what after the fact? After this program ends and they move MJF on to the next opponent, where does that leave Jungle Boy? Toiling in the mid-card? Hanging out in the periphery, not really doing a whole lot? Doesn't that just kind of validate everything MJF said about him? The fact that he's been a huge disappointment and can never excel beyond a certain mid-level? Partially that's his fault, but the other part is Tony Khan's fault for not doing a good job booking him. But it goes both ways. You know, by that point, the only other option, you probably have to turn the guy heel. Which, it might be worth experimenting, if you want my opinion. Jungle Boy already facial resembles one of those disgruntled Gen Zers who hates life and just looks fucking miserable all the time. Why not embrace that? Let's hear what Jungle Boy sounds like when he's just being an extension of himself. Being super pissed. Hating the world. Instead of forcing him on everybody as an artificial babyface, just flip him heel and see where it goes. What's the worst that could happen? It's probably more productive than trying to beat a dead horse with a gimmick that's not shown any promise for the better part of 3.5 years. And I know the marks will try to debate that with me, but just calling it like it is, man. Is Jungle Boy really any better off now than he was in 2019 or 2020? I mean, you can pretend that to be the case, but Max is right. He's the current top champion of the company. Jungle Boy is what? He's a guy. I think he's had one AEW championship reign so far in his career. He was a tag team champion, wasn't he? He hasn't even been a singles champion yet. Again, ma'am, if I'm supposed to buy the idea that these guys are the four pillars, that being Max, Jungle Boy, Darby, and Sammy, for 3.5 years in the business, and this is how much he has to show for it, not having had one major singles championship run at this point, do you see why that's problematic? But what do I know? I know nothing. Tell you what I don't know. I don't know how anybody can manage to sit through these godforsaken Blackpool Combat Club matches. It's got to be a form of punishment that the inmates go through. You know, everything comes in tiers. There's solitary, there's death row, and then there's the level beyond that. Being forced to sit through a fucking Jon Moxley match. That's worse than the chair. Sign me up for that shit before I ever get subjected to having to watch Jon Moxley gig himself like a stuffed piñata. If anyone actually bothered persecuting themselves through this fiasco, the BCC wrestled Dalton Castle and the boys because they needed to fill time, I guess. The only thing I saw during this entire segment was the BCC try to jump attack Dalton and the boys in the aisleway, and Claudio Castagnoli legitimately tripped over Dalton's right foot and went ass over tea kettle. That was comedy. Valuable entertainment on this wacky Bush League television program. Couldn't ask for anything more. That appeared to be mercifully short, though. Didn't stop them from booking the BCC all over this God-blessed program, but at least the match didn't go 20-plus minutes. And no job order, too. That was a blessing in disguise. But after me skipping through several pre-tapes and other random backstage tomfoolery, the next words I hear come out of Justin Roberts' mouth for this next match: the IWGP United States Heavyweight Championship. What? And even drawing out more confusion on the matter, the match is challenger Jeff Cobb taking on current reigning and defending champion. Take 5 guesses without using a source. Bet you never would be able to guess this if you had zero knowledge about it prior to this show. The current IWGP US champion. Okay, you give up? Well, I got you covered. It's Kenny Omega. Again, I ask. What? Kenny Omega is the IWGP US Heavyweight Champion? When? Where? How? Was there any indication to this being the case prior to him just randomly coming out here with the belt? Like we all were just supposed to know offhand that Kenny Omega was the current US champion in another promotion? Keyword being other promotion that nobody outside the marks give a fuck about? Who am I kidding? It's AEW. Of course we're all just supposed to know who's champion. Got 375 people on this roster. 288 of them have belts. So Though how dare I not know that Kenny Omega was the current reigning IWGP US Heavyweight Champion of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And then, of course, there's Jeff Cobb, who I don't think I've seen wrestle on this show since, Forbidden Door last year? Yeah, remember that whole debacle? The one that I tried to discount from memory because it was so horrifically awful? So basically what we had here was a random New Japan match with a random New Japan related story being factored into a random episode of AEW Dynamite after we had been given zero reason to care prior to them airing a 30-second video package. But unlike the match he had last week with El Hijo del Vikingo, or whatever slapnuts his name was, at least they bothered to air a promo package. Because people are going to rake me over the coals for my review of that match last week, how I spent the entire time talking about how there was no indication that we were getting this match prior to the show because they didn't bother to air a video package to explain the backstory or why anybody should give a flying fuck. So I'll give them credit. They aired a promo package. Baby steps. Now, of course, it didn't make a goddamn lick of sense to me because I haven't followed New Japan's product in well over 2 years. Not since the G1 tournament a couple years back. What was that, like fall of 2021? It's been a hot minute. And that sucks because the reviews are actually on my channel right now if you wanted to go back and listen to them. They didn't really garner a lot of traction on my channel. I kind of expected as much. But I covered the whole G1 during that period. And if you go back and listen to all those reviews, you'll remember that I was a pretty big proponent of Jeff Cobb throughout that entire tournament. Now, to be fair, I was basically operating under an anybody but Okada mindset. New Japan's equivalent to fucking John Cena. And after Cobb didn't win, I was like, you know what, I'm done trying to care about this shit. Same old stuff with New Japan. It's always right back to the Okada bandwagon. It's been that way for well over a decade now. No wonder that company fucking sucks. So yeah, Omega and Cobb, they had a match for a belt that belongs to another company across the globe, and again, only a small subset of AEW nuthuggers actually give two fucks about. So the obvious question comes up, why was this match airing on Dynamite? It's a good question. I don't have an answer. And aside from that, it was just kind of a match that existed on the program, if I'm being honest. It is kind of astonishing. The difference level between watching Kenny Omega work a singles match versus a trios match. When he's in there doing the tumbling routines with the Beta Bucks, like he's just as bad as those guys. But you take him out of that environment and you put him in there to work on his own. I mean, he's not fucking Ricky Steamboat or Ric Flair, but he's much more tolerable to put up with. There was a great Freudian slip moment here with Taz. At one point, he accidentally referred to Cobb as Hobbs, which of course got me immediately thinking, where is Powerhouse Hobbs these days? Didn't he just win one of AEW's alleged belts like 3 weeks ago on TV? What's he been doing since? Aside from hanging out with QT Marshall and a bunch of horribly contrived, overly scripted pre-tapes. The answer is not much. He sure as shit ain't wrestling. And I'd much rather see him wrestle on this show. I mean, no offense to Jeff Cobb, but again, I'm going to go back to the overbloated roster dilemma. Why did we need a Jeff Cobb match on this show? Shouldn't Tony be more concerned about trying to get over his own lackluster roster? Instead of bringing in more people? particularly a random New Japan guy that we haven't seen on the show in well over a year. I don't know. Seems perfectly rational to me. Well, you'll be happy to hear Kenny Omega retained. Good for him. But let's talk about the afterbirth. Because you know with AEW, you're bound to get one of these on every show. Statistically, it's like per every 5 seconds on Dynamite, 4 of them are going to result in afterbirth angles. So after Omega retains, here come the BCC to attack him. They surround the ring, and they're about to jump in. When who should come to make their big return to television but Bryan Danielson. And as soon as the music hit, and I see Danielson come barreling down the aisleway to run off his teammates, I'm like, oh God, here we go. Swerve incoming. Brace yourselves for impact. Sure enough, called this one plain as day. Danielson tells the BCC to back off, so they hightail it out to the floor long enough for Danielson to help Omega back to his feet, only for Omega to immediately try and charge Yuta on the apron. And of course, he turns his back. So when he turns around over his shoulder, he eats the knee from Danielson. He lays him out. Danielson locks in the label lock, simultaneously while the BCC are fake punting Omega in the ribs and barely connecting with their feet. Beyond fucking egregious. And of course, all the geeks start filing out, and they all end up eating shit in the process. So, yeah, we kind of all saw this one coming. But there's your inevitable BCC versus Elite War Games match. Again, beyond the fact that nobody wants to see that outside the hardcores, we all kind of had to figure this is what they'd wind up shoehorning Danielson back into. Coming out of that great match with MJF at the Revolution pay-per-view, he was one of the most sympathetic underdog babyfaces in that match. Now here he is, getting saddled right back into the same purgatorial state that he was in for the last 12 months, surrounding himself with Jon Moxley and this rotten BCC bullshit. Should have known better. Kind of had it planted in the back of my mind that coming out of that MJF program, it was going to spill inevitable disaster for Danielson. I was cautiously hopeful things would have turned out for the better. But now that I know what he's going to be involved with for the time being, I can pretty much assert that anything he's factored in with for the show is going to be hot garbage. So this all sucked a wet cock. As did pretty much everything else for the remainder of the show, up until the main event. So allow for me to just breeze through some of the remainders of my notes here, because I ain't giving this dreck more time than it's worth. Yet again, they're still prostrating their company mascot all over this fucking show. What is this, like the 88th week in a row this cretin's been allowed to go out there and jack off in front of a nationwide cable audience? Look at it this way. Jeff Jarrett at his best could barely get something watchable out of the guy. So realistically speaking, what did you expect out of the Butcher? What do you think you're really going to get out of him? Tell you what he got out of me was a fast-forward skip. As did the Willow Nightingale Ruby no-go match. That was a hard no-go for me, dog. Which then sort of led me to skip over everything until we actually got to the main event. But I did take a minute to analyze the card for next week's show, at least what the lineup currently reads. Right now, for next week's Dynamite in Long Island, here's what we have. Juice Robinson versus Ricky Starks. because that feud is still going on apparently, an advertised MJF Day because, you know, they're in Long Island and MJF is from Long Island. We also have Jamie Hayter defending her women's title against Riho, because I guess they already don't designate enough piss breaks for their audience in a given 2-hour window. And we will also hear from the Blackpool Combat Club. Hear about what, you ask? I have no idea. Probably some contrived way of them explaining why Bryan Danielson came back and turned heel, and then Jon Moxley will talk about how much he likes the smell of his own vomit and likes to drink the bones and eat the blood and feel the rotting flesh of his opponents because he's hardcore and a fucking idiot. So there's your riveting lineup for next week's Dynamite. A must-see stellar edition of TV coming your way. Get those DVRs set now. But with all of that brought us to the finale. This has been 9 months in the making, after what was a grueling, long road to recovery for him, following the concussions and all the other injuries that were piling up on him over the last year. We finally get the in-ring return of Adam Cole, baby. Finally. That was at least the mentality going in beforehand. And, well, first I think I should cover this because it's easy enough for me to sit here and critique the match and talk about what actually happened. You're obviously going to get a lot of mixed bag reactions from people here. Adam Cole versus Daniel Garcia with 1 week's build, essentially. And they pretty much had the exact match I figured they would. When it comes to Cole's work in this match, obviously people are going to throw out the term ring rust. And that's probably a fair analysis of everything that went down here. It was a fairly short main event. You know, I think they made sure they didn't want it to overstay its welcome. You know, give Cole a big win back for his return and send the people home happy. Okay, whatever. Good. You know, I'll take it. You know, I constantly bitch and moan that AEW never knows how to do enhancement matches correctly because everything always has to be a 50-50 back and forth 20-minute slog. This, they did it right. They gave Cole the shine. Garcia cut him off and tried to work over his previously injured head. I don't think I needed to see Cole taking 2 pile drivers in his first match back, especially if they were just going to be spots instead of serious angles to play up the jeopardy of the situation. But at the end of the day, that's probably just me being nitpicky, because my main gripe with this goes beyond anything that actually happened in the match. And I'll talk about the Jericho stuff in a minute. That's not what I'm getting at. You know, sometimes perspective is key. Sometimes you need those second opinions to sort of draw you in on very obvious facts that you may gloss over. Whether that deals with biases or just being sort of unobservant to the truths that are staring you right in the fucking face the entire time. And you go years and years without ever drawing attention to it because for one reason or another, you're like trying to convince yourself that it's not reality, that what you're seeing is not what you're getting. I've been a big fan of Adam Cole's for a long time. You know, when he was in NXT and they were pushing him as the top guy, he fit that system so well. He was booked and treated like a big deal. He stood out. Somehow, some way, they found a way to make Adam Cole work under that old NXT model. AEW never brought that same presentation for Cole when he showed up. They booked him like a joke. They fed him to the company mascot. They buried him. They killed him. And on top of that, there's the other issue. And I think you all know what I'm getting at. And look, some people are going to view this in a different light. Some people have been more critical of it than others. I am personally very passionate about this particular topic because I would say as little as, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years ago now, I was in really, really bad physical shape. Like, unhealthy physical shape. I was very scrawny. I had no muscle definition. I basically looked like your average middle school female teen in today's culture. Which goes to show you the sorry state of our society in 2023. The fact that me at the time being 28 or 29 years old can also be compared to looking physically on par with a middle school or high school female teenager. But it's true. I looked horrible. And I realized that. I realized it enough to wake up one day, look myself in the mirror and say, you look like shit. You need to hit the gym. You need to pick up weights. You need to try to do some cardio. At least try to develop some kind of goddamn physique. Not trying to be a bodybuilder, not trying to look like a Greek god or Giga Chad, whatever the popular term is these days. I just want to look physically fit. And I'm still not where I want to be now. But I can tell you I'm in much better physical shape today than I was 5 or 6 years ago. Here's the difference between myself and Adam Cole. I am not on nationwide television in nothing but a pair of trunks, boots, and knee pads. Adam Cole is. And we can sit here and debate this until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but Brian Last forever ruined my ability to take Adam Cole seriously again. I just can't unsee it. He looks like a fucking high school teenage female. I'm not even necessarily pinpointing the hair as the issue. I mean, I have long hair too. It's not the problem. The problem is the physique. Or lack of said physique. He has no muscle tone, no body definition, nothing. He looks like an average Joe. There's nothing about him that screams professional wrestler. When I look at him on camera, I don't see pro wrestler. He's all entrance. Once you get past the boom deal and the Adam Cole Bebe pose, the bell rings. He's nothing special. At least not in AEW he isn't. And again, this is the genius of the way they can mask all these problems in NXT with the way they presented the product. Again, Adam Cole stood out under the NXT banner. In AEW, that spark is gone. Now, granted, he's wrestling Daniel Garcia, and that guy has enough personality to make dry paint ooze charisma. So that probably wasn't the best opponent to put Cole in there with. It also tied in with the JAS nonsense, which I'm trying to put off for as long as humanly possible here. But again, man, this was what I was hoping Cole was going to take the time to address during all that time he had off. And yeah, I know there were underlying health issues in the last year. Hitting the gym probably was not going to be his first priority. But he looks no better off now than he did before he got hurt. He has a little bit of a tan now, which is good, but physically, he has no shoulder definition, no chest definition. His arms are the same size they were before he went away. His legs are the same size as before. I'm sorry. I don't buy for a second that with proper dieting and weight training, he couldn't have easily put on at least 5 to 10 pounds in muscle mass in a 4 to 5 month window. Absolutely no, I don't buy that. I put on 3 to 5 pounds of muscle mass just by lifting weights for 3 months. 3 months. That's all it took. I never lifted a goddamn weight in my life up to that point. Now, granted, I went 5 times a week and strictly focused on a lot of upper body workouts, so it wasn't the well-rounded routine. But I still managed to grow my biceps and triceps in that time frame. I mean, it's hard work, but you put in the reps. It starts to become muscle memory after a while. And again, this is coming from somebody that used to be a big Adam Cole fan. I really would like for this guy to take his work seriously and understand that for the profession that he's chosen to be in, for the line of work that he has signed up for, there's got to be a modicum of effort on his end to at least look presentable on camera. To at least look like he has taken the time to present himself as a professional wrestler. And when I'm standing there after the bell watching Britt Baker come out and hug him, and her arms are fucking twice the size of Adam Cole's, that's fucking unacceptable. Any man worth their salt that sees that on television laughs and mocks that. And again, I understand the concussion issue really put a hindrance on Cole's health. But if you're telling me that this was his best effort to get in better ring shape after all that time off, if that's the lowered bar of expectations, then I'm sorry to say, raise your fucking standards, people. So that's honestly what my attention was averted to for the entirety of the match. I just keep going back to the common thread of me not being able to unhear Bryan's last statement on Adam Cole. He doesn't look like a professional wrestler. Because the indication that I get as a fan is that he doesn't take his work seriously enough to even want to try to look like a professional wrestler. That's the sad part. And then there's the Jericho thing. I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, I fucking knew! It was only a matter of goddamn time. Jericho saw that reception that Cole got when he came back to do that promo a couple months ago, and he said, I know exactly whose thunder I'm going to steal. So it would appear that the inevitable program is Jericho versus Cole. Which on paper probably sounds wonderful to those watching at home. But if you know anything about Jericho's track record and the people he does business with, no one, I repeat, no one comes out looking good on the other end. You want references? Cite my sources. Ask Eddie Kingston. Ask Santana and Ortiz. Ask MJF. Ask Bryan Danielson. Ask fucking Ricky Starks. Every time, without fail, he ends up burying the guy he's feuding with because of his incessant focus on trying to creatively stifle everything he's involved with. Why should I expect Adam Cole to be any different? Visibly, it looks ridiculous because Chris Jericho's like 3 inches taller and 3 times the size of Adam Cole. So at the end of the day, this was very frustrating for me because I had higher expectations. I really did. I thought Adam was going to take this opportunity to really focus on his health, take his work seriously, and get off on the right footing again. But then he came back looking like he did here, and At the end of the day, nothing's changed. So was it a letdown for me? Yeah, kind of was. Again, I thought Cole would have had enough self-pride to say, yeah, maybe it's time I need to hit the gym a little harder and try to look presentable on TV. Not just for myself, but for the fans. And instead, he came back looking pretty much exactly as he did before he went away. Plus, the match was no good, but it's really not all that important in the grand scheme of things. Fucking Jericho, dude. Should have known better. I was like, oh, there's no way they're going to feud Cole with Jericho. Cole's too smart for that. He won't get involved in any of that business. Sure enough, the Daniel Garcia was a red flag. And then with 2 minutes left in the show, that Judas theme hits. Here comes Jericho to steal all of Adam Cole's thunder and making the whole goddamn thing about him. What a prick that guy is. I mean, on the one hand, I much prefer seeing that over Cole doing all that Undisputed Elite bullshit he was involved with over a year ago. The horrible comedy and the bad acting skits. Because that equally sucked. I mean, do you want me to try to stay cautiously optimistic? I mean, I can hold out hope all I want, but history is on my side when it comes to anybody working programs with Jericho on this show. Maybe Cole will be exception to the rule. It is going to be interesting watching babyface Adam Cole. I don't recall the last time ever seeing that. Most of the time I've ever seen Cole work, he's been a heel, and he was a natural fit. Albeit it's going to take some getting used to. But the first priority is the look department, man. You know, I can exclude any other part of the conversation because the one thing that'll continue to bother me is the body issue. I'm going to keep beating that dead horse. Adam needs to get in better ring shape. Because until I see some vast improvement in the way he looks without a shirt on, this is all I'm going to be able to dwell on anytime I see him wrestle. Anytime I see him on TV in the tights. This is what my focus is going to be on. That and the egregious thigh slaps, which he had several of in this match alone. He's got to stop making that so apparent. Aside from that, though, I have nothing further to add. I mean, Double or Nothing is the next pay-per-view. It would seem that there are two programs that we're going to get on that show. Cole and Jericho being one, which they teased here. And I guess Jungle Boy and MJF for the title, which I'm not all that enthralled with. Oh yeah, and I almost forgot about this. I got so swept up in that piss-poor card announcement for next week. I don't think I mentioned FTR is also doing a career versus title match with the Ass Boys. Yeah, let's just hype up that one a week in advance and throw it under the bus like it's nothing. Yeah, you folks could see Dax and Cash have to leave AEW next week if they lose. For free! So, I mean, that basically means one of two things. FTR is losing, and they're finally ditching this godforsaken company to go somewhere where they'll actually be treated like stars. Or they're winning the AEW tag titles, and what? Toiling around whatever's left of AEW's life support tag division? Probably betting on the latter over the former, but boy, with the way FTR has been neutered on this roster for the better part of 3 years, can you really blame those guys if they're looking to get out while they still have some name credibility left? Well, we're about a couple weeks out from the 87 Crockett Cup. The build for it has been mildly intriguing. Mostly in the sense that in the lead up to a tag team tournament, the two big stories going on right now are all about the breakup of their top faction, as well as the inexplicable disappearance of one guy from another top tag team. For those unaware of what I'm referring to, Ole Anderson getting blacklisted from the Horsemen, and I'm also talking about Dennis Condrey's abrupt departure from Crockett Promotions, literally within weeks of the Crockett Cup. Meanwhile, hey folks, got a great tag team tournament coming up on the 10th and 11th of April. Don't want to miss that. It's impeccable timing with how all this went down. But the Horseman story is still in full swing. Last week, Ole was maligned, homogenized, sodomized by the Horsemen. They beat him like a government mule, threw him out of the locker room like a sack of wet dirt. They officially all turned their backs on him, including Ric Flair. And he was pretty quiet on the television show about the situation. Didn't really say a whole lot. But all of that came to a head on an NWA Pro taping in the last week, where Ole confronted Flair during a Horseman six-man tag. Luger, Tully, and Arn are in the ring. Flair's at the interview station with Bob Caudle. And while Flair's talking down to Ole, he ends up coming out and getting in Flair's face. And that was their lead-in for this week's program. The big Ole-Flair confrontation. 1 week after Ole was beaten to a bloody pulp in the locker room, he's still trying to fight the good fight. And we found out later on how all of that went down. We also had more story development to cover when it came to Dick Murdoch and Nikita Koloff. That was another central focus on this week's Superstation programming. Lot to get into, and we'll be discussing all in further detail. For now, we go to the ring for a Rock and Roll Express versus Chance McQuaid and Big Bill Tab Squash. This particular show had a lot of tag action this week, which made sense considering that the teams are working their way up to the Crockett Cup in a few weeks. So they tried to feature as many teams as they could in a 2-hour time frame. They wrestled for a few minutes. Ricky and Robert won with the usual double drop kick. You know how the old saying goes, they don't get paid by the hour. They also talked about the Crockett Cup briefly and said they were gunning for the $1 million. Then we come back from break, and we get Jim Cornette and Big Bubba out. Cornette's doing a quick rundown of Bubba's upcoming road schedule, plugging the forthcoming cage match with him and Dusty. Then after Bubba gets done rubbing and mangling Dusty's face on the steel, he's going to turn around and travel over to the Boston Gardens to square off with the old fossil, Ole Anderson. To which I wrote down in my notes, oh yeah, I forgot about that little story detail. The angle from a couple weeks back where JJ paid off Bubba to take out Ole on TV, and then Bubba proceeded to get his ass kicked in less than 20 seconds. Guess that money is still on the table. This is another promo that I really didn't write a whole lot down about. I did catch Corny's closing line right before he introduced Beautiful Bobby for the next match. But he said that soon, we'd all be acquainted with the new and improved Midnight Express. Translation, Dennis is out. So get ready for us to try and rationalize how Stan Lane shows up from out of nowhere to be Bobby's new partner. And we're all just supposed to gloss over it and be like, oh, well, guess that's a thing now. To be continued. So yes, Beautiful Bobby wrestled Vernon Deaton. And my notes basically consist of the following bullet points. Bobby did some moves, and one was something that Cornette referred to as the hemorrhoid hop. For the record, it was a top rope leg drop. And my other note reads, Cornette ranted about a lot of stuff during this match. There were things mentioned about Bubba going up against Ole and Dusty. something about the Garvin brothers and Precious. The only thing I got out of that was Cornette mocking Precious for being a prostitute. And I think I also heard him try to compare Ronnie Garvin to Barney Fife. You know, albeit there aren't too many Midnight Express segments on the show where I actually struggle to come up with anything to talk about. This was one where by the end of it, I'm like, everything that occurred here was almost an exact carbon copy of Bobby Eaton's match on last week's show. Up to and including Cornette's rambling promo at the booth. If I did a side-by-side comparison, I don't think I would have been able to find one single thing that differentiated them. Not saying that's a good or bad thing necessarily, it just didn't leave a whole lot of room for elaboration. But now we come to our recap portion of the program. The Ole Flair confrontation that they cliffhung us earlier on. Cliffhung? Is that a word? Cliffhanged? What would the past tense version of cliffhang or cliffhanger be? Cliffhung? Cliffhanged? Cliffhunged? How many potential Dustyisms can I come up with on such a short notice? Yeah, baby, time to address what we got you all cliff-hung down early on in the show, daddy. You know what I'm saying? Well, the cliffhanger follow-up, if you will. So Ole confronted Flair at the interview booth, and he's going off on Flair, saying that he never gave him any world title shots. And when you know it, Ole going right for the throat by trying to pick a fight with Flair, and he knew exactly how to get under his skin. He went right for the custom suit. So Ole starts ripping at Flair's shirt, tearing off his clothes, hitting Flair where it hurts the most. The wallet. When the Horsemen come over to run Ole off, Flair, of course, is hot. He's flipping his lid. He's bright red. His eyes are bugged out. He's stomping and running back and forth like a wild man. I like at one point, he did an entire lap around the exit door before running back into the interview station to scream at Ole. That's classic Ric Flair for you. But with the wild eyes, blood boiling, and spit flying, basically told Ole that he made the biggest mistake of his life. And if he thinks he's felt real pain, he doesn't know what's coming to him when the Horsemen get their hands on him. I believe one of his exact quotes was him saying that if Ole wants to be a Horseman again, he'll die a Horseman. To which I immediately thought, did Flair just admit to a pre-planned first-degree murder? In broad daylight, no less? On nationwide television? You know, I'm thinking that if the Horsemen were going to kill Ole Anderson outright, I'm pretty sure this tape wouldn't have any issue putting those guys behind bars for life. This was a great Ric Flair promo, though. If you remove the idea that Flair essentially just confessed to a prearranged criminal act in front of God and everybody. Ole didn't seem fazed by it, though. Nah, he's right out there to do a follow-up promo. He's fine. He's not shaken up. Just talking to the Horsemen and saying that they left him no choice at the end of the day. If Ole chose family over business, that meant the Horsemen didn't need Ole's association anymore. So what's done is done. They kicked him out. So be it. He's not going to cry over spilt milk. But from Ole's perspective, when he stood toe-to-toe with Flair at that interview station, the Horsemen didn't seem so bad when it came to a one-on-one situation. I did like him referring to JJ here as a blonde weasel geek. But he says that he's got enough fight left in him to confront the Horsemen again. And the first man on that hit list is Tully Blanchard, the guy that threw the first punch. And when Ole takes the fight to all of them, he's going to do it for that snot-nosed kid of his, which I did smile at. The idea that they managed to get over snot-nosed kid as a saying in 1987, and we will we will continue to refer to Ole's son as such, snot-nosed punk. Speaking of snot, Ole beat the snot out of Kent Glover in about a minute, dishing out pain, blues, and agony, as David Crockett noted here, without the dusty accent, obviously. And in the best finish of the show, Ole locks in the armbar. He's screaming, "Tully! Tully!" to the top of his lungs. And as Scrappy calls for the bell and Glover's yelling in pain, David Crockett very smoothly just goes, "Ah, poor Tully." Probably thinking in the back of his mind, well, that man's about to die. And he's overcome with glee to see it happen. He's the best. Tell you what I was not overcome with glee to see or hear. Francis Crockett's Baltimore tour session, part 2. For the second straight occasion, they had Francis Crockett bore the audience to sleep with a dry mutter about the Baltimore land sites, telling us about all the various places we can travel while we're watching the Crockett Cup in Baltimore. One of those aforementioned places being the Harbor Place, which I guess was just a ways down the road from the Baltimore Arena. And here's her pitch for the kinds of activities and or shopping sprees that we can partake in while we're at the Harbor Place souvenir shop. Okay, think of all the gadgets you would expect to see in a souvenir shop. Here's a list of 4 items that Francis came up with. Clothes, kites, pastries, and fudge. Not the first 4 things that I would have come up with off the top of my head. The fudge comment got me. And they threw up an image of a giant strip of fudge on camera for like 5 seconds. No joke. It looked like something Andre the Giant would have squeezed out of his anal orifice. But the point is, go to the Harbor Place shop while you're in Baltimore. You might get the opportunity to see fudge. At this point in the show, I was just looking for excuses to entertain myself. It didn't get any easier with watching the Kansas Jayhawks wrestle Randy Barber and Mike Force. But the real question, did Mike truly have the force? Well, he had the force to push me away from having to watch this match. Surprisingly, the guy had a pretty good body. He was a tiny man, but he was in good shape. Better shape than Adam Cole. He did appear to have a tattoo of a butterfly above his right pec. It was visually unappealing. More so than Dirty Dutch's body hair. Here's everything I wrote down about it. Incredibly boring squash. Jagger's won with a standing elbow drop. And I'm not even talking like an elbow drop where he runs off the ropes and tries to get some height in the air before dropping the elbow. No, he stood over Mike. He leapt about 3 centimeters in the air, dropped an elbow, and nonchalantly pinned him. At which point we go back to the booth for a Precious Paul Ellering promo. He's back after his successful tour with the Road Warriors over in the Orient, because that was still a politically correct thing to say back in the day. And now he is sporting the clean mustache look, also dressed in a black suit with shades. Looked like a badass. He's doing the babyface promo, putting over the Legion of Doom as opportunists, putting over their successful title victory in Japan. And now that they're walking into Baltimore this year as the reigning and defending Crockett Cup tournament winners, Animal and Hawk don't care what they have to do to win the $1 million. They beat people up for a living, and they take pride in doing so. So it's a warning message to all the other teams. If they happen to stumble across the Legion of Doom, they should prepare to feel the wrath. And the fans certainly agreed there. And then after the break, we had our second major story follow-up for the week. It was during a recent Sunday taping with Nikita Koloff, where he was blindsided by Captain Redneck Dick Murdoch, currently one half of the United States Tag Team Champions with the Russians. And it was during that angle that a heinous, despicable act occurred. So Murdoch attacked Nikita post-match. He dragged him out to the floor. He gave him a brainbuster on the concrete, left him for dead. And of course, Dusty's running out from the back yelling for them to get a stretcher. Nikita's selling it like he's dead. And, we had Dusty and Nikita in a follow-up covering the incident. First, we had David Crockett explaining that Dick Murdoch will be slapped with a heavy fine for his actions, letting us know that NWA is taking the situation very seriously, and he will be reprimanded for what he did. As far as Dusty's comments go, he's talking about how injuries are a part of the business, but there are also scenarios where guys make deliberate attempts to end people's careers out of spite and malice, and that's exactly what Murdoch did. The deed was done, Daddy. The foul play was entered in the books of life. That was an exact quote, by the way. But while Nikita was in rehab, Dusty talked about how the superpowers could have pulled it out of the Crockett Cup, give Nikita a proper chance to recover and get back on his feet again. But Nikita says that even though Murdoch made it hard for him to work out, hard for him to wrestle, hard for him to sleep at night, this incident isn't going to stop Nikita from doing what he loves. The Crockett Cup is too important for Nikita to pull out from. So even if Dusty has to carry him out to the ring and back, Nikita will be there to fight, broken neck or not. And that, baby, is what we call living on the edge of a lightning bolt. Then coming back from break, we went to an Armstrong promo. Brad wearing his way too oversized polo shirt for the occasion, putting over the Crockett Cup and all the talent that are going to be a part of it. But even though he and his father had their sights set on the $1 million and the trophy, Brad's also got some unsettled beef to settle with Ric Flair. I just realized how stupid that statement sounded. Unsettled beef to settle. He's got a score to settle. How about that? Anyway. But he issues the challenge, asks Flair if he's willing to accept it. And then as God is my witness, I'm not making this up, Bullet Bob proceeded to go on a 2-minute tirade about something. Here's what I got out of it. He received a letter from some guy. Apparently it was somebody that knew Dick Murdoch when he was locked up in an insane asylum or something. Started talking about how Murdoch was so ruthless and out of control, they had to ship him over to Canada because none of the guards could control him. And then there was another comment about a southbound mule, which was not as funny as the first time Bullet Bob cracked a joke about mules. All the while, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what the fuck is this guy talking about? For the life of me, I had no idea what Bullet Bob was trying to get over here, or how Dick Murdoch had anything to do with the Armstrongs. The only thing I really got out of it was that apparently Bullet Bob is very good friends with an ex-con, which is oddly concerning for a babyface. So that was the thing that happened. Maybe he's friends with Dominic Mysterio. That would have been an interesting plot twist. Tell you what, though. All of that was far more interesting than Wahoo McDaniel and the Baron versus Larry Clark and Rick Sullivan. I nearly screamed when I saw this graphic appear. And I nearly screamed even louder when they wrestled for about 4 minutes. And then up popped a graphic that read, "We'll be right back," signifying that this was about to go through a commercial break. Of all the matches, Wahoo ended up going over with a horrible-looking suplex. Then, following that, we had a pre-tape with Mike Rotunda, where he's putting over Tim Horner in the entire Crockett Cup. The only bit of dialogue I really took away from it was Rotunda saying that he and Horner are in this thing for the money, to which I noted, and thus the IRS gimmick was born. See, everything comes full circle in wrestling, right? Oh, by the way, forgot to mention that. Florida heavyweight champion, Mike Rotunda. I guess he beat Who Dat for the belt not all that recently. That's pretty much all I got out of that. Didn't get much out of Wahoo and Baron's follow-up promo. Aside from the fact that Wahoo is sick of being a nice guy and trying to take it easy in the ring. He and the Baron are headed to Baltimore to snap some necks, beat some ass, and win the whole dang tournament. And if Wahoo has to get down and dirty to make it happen, so be it. Sounds perfectly rational to me. Fuck the money. Wearing this thing to cave some skulls in, brother. What a nice guy that Wahoo McDaniel is. Then we went back to the ring for a Big Bubba squash. He wrestled Cougar J. Wrestle being a relatively loose term here. Bubba hit some power moves for a minute, and then after hitting a moderately impressive-looking Canadian backbreaker, Bubba slapped on the weakest, fakest-looking armbar imaginable, got the dude to submit. Not to give the guy a hard time or anything, but it did look very phony. But that was all relatively short and concise. Then we cut back over to the podium for Dick Murdoch and the Russians. And even with Captain Redneck standing right there in the frame for this promo, of course, who should be holding one half of the U.S. tag belts but Vladimir Petrov? Beyond insulting. And of course, they're out there boasting about what Murdoch did to Nikita, saying he got a taste of what real pain and suffering looks like. And now the only thing left to do is for the Russians to return the favor to Dusty. Murdoch talks about how he vowed he was going to hurt Nikita, and that's exactly what he did. And as far as Dusty goes, he isn't going to make it to the Crockett Cup. And on the subject of Jim Crockett and these alleged fines, well, I can't confirm this 100%, but I'm pretty sure Murdoch insisted that he would be taking Jim Crockett to court if he tried fining Murdoch for his actions. And his punchline at the end was him informing Crockett that he was about to get burned. And of all the phrases I never thought I would hear uttered on a wrestling show in 1987, declaring that somebody was about to get burned, that ranks up there. Then we had a VTR with superstar Bill Dundee and the Mod Squad, putting over the competition in the Crockett Cup and name-dropping the top seeds. But he's also assuring that whether it's him in the Barbarian or the Mod Squad, they stand a better chance of coming out on top than anybody. 'Twas a promo. I did like the visual of seeing the Jeffers brothers stand there behind Dundee, completely stone-faced. And of course, they got their motorcycle helmets set on the podium. just to remind us that they're supposed to be badass bikers. Because, they're tough guys. Not as tough as Lex Luger and Tully Blanchard, though, who wrestled Todd Champion and Denny Brown. It's funny, too. I keep going back and forth with this. So far, they've randomly paired Luger with Arn and Tully on this show in separate tag matches. A few weeks ago, I thought, damn, I really like the Tully Luger pairing. I could see more of that. But I think it was last week's show. Then I saw an even better squash with Luger and Arn teaming together. Now I'm conflicted. Because they went back to the Luger-Tully team this week, and it was a lot of fun. So they're really throwing me for a loop with me trying to decide which Luger pairing I prefer over the other. I also noted here, I guess Denny Brown is a babyface again. He was working heel for several junior heavyweight title matches. Of course, maybe that was just because he was wrestling Lasertron. But he made a big fiery comeback on Tully. Tully fed for him really well, took all kinds of big bumps. And right at the finish, when Denny goes to drag Tully into the ring with a suplex, Luger kicks Denny's leg out of his leg. And Tully takes advantage, hits Denny with a slingshot suplex for the pin. And to cap everything off perfectly, they get the floor shot where Luger and Tully are standing next to each other. And of course, Luger has to strike a flex pose. Because, his biceps are huge. So, what do we have next? Well, we had a Horseman promo for one. I was looking ahead here real quick to see how much damage we had left. Oh, JJ was out of the booth with Tully and Luger, doing another Ole rant, talking about how when Ole was in the Horseman, he was financially secure, but since he prioritized his kids and family over his boys, now he's left with nothing. You lose. Good day, sir. He's been cut off financially, and it's all of his own doing. For Tully, he's learned plenty from working with Ole over the last couple years, and if Ole thinks he's sweating getting into a fight, he's got another thing coming. If Ole wants to target Tully first on the list, whether it's for the TV belt or not, he can come dish out the fight, because Tully's going to come back fighting. Then Luger kind of rounded out things here with running down Nikita Koloff and saying that he's gunning for the U.S. Championship. I believe his exact line was, and I quote, "There's a void around this chiseled body of mine." To which I thought, is that not the most uncool thing you've ever heard a guy say before? I mean, I get the idea that Luger's supposed to be well-spoken because, he went to college. I, too, went to college. I can assure you, as somebody that obtained a bachelor's degree, never in a million years would I use the line, filling a void around my chiseled body. But he does want the U.S. title. Made no bones about that. And after that, we had Arn Anderson versus Tim Horner, which by default made this the best match on the entire program. And it was a pretty good TV match, all things considered, even if the competition wasn't all that high for this episode. They had Horner cut off Arn early on, wrap his leg around the ring post, so he spent some time working that over, trying to keep Arn grounded and use his quickness and agility to outmaneuver Arn. Good stuff with Horner getting a few flash roll-ups and near falls. In the best finish of all time, Arn goes for the brainbuster, but Horner is able to reverse it and land on his feet. He catches Arn in the go-behind, tries to give him the bridging suplex, and right as Scrappy goes down to count the three, here come Tully, Luger, and JJ to interfere and stop the pinfall. In the best comedy bit of the entire night, They all run in the ring to try to grab a handful of Horner before he scurries out of the ring. All three of these guys are stumbling and bumbling and tripping over each other, looking like total jackasses, all in the attempt to try to get their hands on Tim Horner. And even though the match ends via disqualification with a fucked finish, these studio fans are on their feet applauding and cheering for this Tim Horner, because he managed to outsmart three bumbling idiots, all of whom failed to get their hands on him before he escaped the ring. Meanwhile, David Crockett's in the background cheering Horner and popping for it. I'm just sitting there watching this like, never in a million years would a fucked finish like this ever get over. These are the kinds of days I long for in the wrestling business again. To see a time where a babyface wins a match by DQ, but the fans are going nuts for it because they saw the top heels get outsmarted. That's all it took. The fans got to see the Horsemen look like a bunch of bumbling buffoons. That's all they cared about. This is the best 5-minute segment on the entire show. Well, toss up between that and the main event, which we'll get to in a bit. The best shot here was JJ too, because he goes to leap into the ring, but he doesn't directly land on his feet. So all we see is JJ flying into the frame through the middle rope, basically taking a phantom flat back bump before he gets to his feet, in a full suit, no less. I laughed so hard at that. It was even better in slow-mo. And of course, Arn's at the booth seconds later, sweating profusely. Even though the match, I think, went about 3 minutes and some change. One of his first lines during his rant was him claiming that Horner took a powder. There's some insider terminology for you. But he gets off the Horner subject rather quickly and delves into another tirade on Ole. He, basically just asserted that Ole can try to jump the Horseman all he wants, but he should be smart enough to know that the numbers game is always going to catch up to him. And while they turn things over to the Crockett Cup, that gets them on the subject of Kevin Sullivan, the man we now know is replacing Ole as Arn's original partner. So they cut to a pre-tape where Kevin chimed in with a couple words. He basically just said that he's there to do what Ole is incapable of doing because he's lost the fire. He says that there's more fire in his eyes, and when it comes to the Senior Memorial Crockett Cup, Sullivan is there to win the whole thing. No. It was a Kevin Sullivan promo. They were always kind of low-key to begin with, but there's your takeaway from that. I think our first on-screen sighting of Kevin Sullivan in Crockett Promotions. Then we had Ric Flair in the studio for a relatively generic promo per Ric Flair standards. It wasn't the same promo he cut in that pre-tape earlier on, where he was shouting obscenities at Ole. Here he was basically the corporate bulletin board, plugging the upcoming shows and putting over the talent that are going to be wrestling in the big cities. There was a match he was plugging between him and Jim Garvin, which I think was happening in Atlanta. I did note at the end, a friend of his was planning on meeting up with Flair in Baltimore. Get a load of this name. Dick Wood. Had to be a rib. Just had to be. If Ric Flair actually had a real friend named Dick Wood, the parents ought to have been arrested for child abuse. Then Barry Windham wrestled Dave Spearman. Windham won with the lariat in like 15 seconds. Then coming back from that, we had Paul Jones and the Ravishing Rick Rude. The Ravishing Rick Rude. Did I just say that? No, there was only one. Anyway, they were out for a promo. Minus Manny Fernandez, who was inexplicably missing from the equation. And Well, Paul said a lot of words. That he did. One of those bits of dialogue consisted of him mentioning that Rude and Bull had been studying tapes of all the teams in the Crockett Cup. I guess including the teams that were randomly paired together for this specific tournament and never worked any tag matches prior. Whoops. I more so got a kick out of his line where he specifically pointed out how they have been studying Ivan Koloff and his partner. Guaranteed. Fucking-teed. Paul Jones had no idea who Ivan's partner was. You saw him in the frame too. He tried to think of the name for like 5 seconds. I think he just gave up trying. I don't blame him. I mean, we all know who we're referring to. It's Vladimir Petrov. The guy didn't stick around in the business that long. But then Rude called out several random dudes before putting over how he and Bull were going to steamroll through the competition. He specifically called out Dick Murdoch, challenging him to step up to the plate. Then he also insinuated that Flair was trying to refer to himself as the 60-minute man. And, well, then Paul Jones posed the, "What would you do for $1 million?" question. I thought he was going to ask, "What would you do for a Klondike bar?" That would have been a great cap to the promo. But as we chug along through the report here and try to get through the remainder of this thing, Rick Rude had a solo match with Larry Stevens. He won in very short blink-and-you-miss-it order. Went with the Rude Awakening DDT. Then we went back to the podium with Precious and the Garvin brothers. Ronnie's talking about how there's a lot of chaos going on right now. Guys turning on each other, beating people up left and right, random alliances. But Ronnie's still got his sights set on Jim Cornette and getting the redemption inside the cage. And he can rack up all the lawyers in the world to try to weasel his way out of that contract. But there's no escape when the door shuts to that cage and Corny has nowhere to run or hide. Then Jimmy requests that the stagehand moves the podium out of the way for some strange reason. I guess so he could flash his all-white apparel. Also to call out Ric Flair. He has the match signed with Flair in Atlanta, but he's going for more than the gold. He's going in to defend the honor of his squeeze. He's tired of the insults and the backstabbing games. This is about chivalry, goddammit. Ain't Jimmy a good, kind, traditional man? Well, mercifully, we get to the main event of this thing. They've been hyping up the TV debut of the Gladiators on this program. That was something I failed to mention at the top of the review, but yes, there was a new tag team that was being advertised. And we saw them come out to wrestle the Mulkey brothers here. They referred to the Gladiators as the current West Coast Tag Team Champions. And this right here, you know, I constantly make jokes about how certain segments are so comedic that it has to be a rib. This might have been the single best rib of all time. No cap. What a fucking payoff to this thing. I mean, it made the entire show worth the watch just to get to the last 4 minutes of this one. So for anybody wondering, who are the Gladiators? The answer was, well, nobody important. They're two generic interchangeable dudes in full blue bodysuits and masks. I presume they were just two sets of job guys the NWA had been frequently using around this point, but they just put them under hoods so we couldn't tell who they were. So they come out for the start of this thing. They immediately go on the attack of the Mulkeys. And they build to a finish about a minute later where one of the gladiators goes to hoist up a Mulkey brother into the ring for a vertical suplex, but the other Mulkey is standing right behind him, so he winds up inadvertently tripping the gladiator. And they basically do a slip on a banana peel finish where one of the Mulkeys falls on top and gets the surprise pin. The people erupted for this finish. David Crockett in particular went into a full-blown frenzy, practically giving himself a hernia over this. The gladiators are overselling the shit out of it. The Mulkeys are smiling and in complete disbelief that they actually won a match for a change. And the whole thing is made so much better by the fact that David goes over to immediately interview them, but because of the fact that the Mulkeys never win on this show and they're complete geeks, they're trying to sell the idea that they had no idea where the camera was. So David's trying to steer them over to look at the camera so they can cut their promo. And they basically said nothing. They just threw up their hands and said, "We don't know what to say." To which I thought, best promo of 1987. Hands down. Of course, David shouting from the rooftops, "It's Mulkey Mania, baby!" It gets even better, because here come one of the gladiators to pitch a fit, saying they flew all the way out from the West Coast just to get butt-fucked by two guys that can't even tie their own shoes. And this is so awesome, because while this guy is trying to rant and rave about the whole situation, he's also having to constantly grab at his mask to pull it down because the bottom lip keeps creeping over his mouth. It's unintentional comedy at its finest. And there's David laughing uproariously the whole time, capping it off perfectly with the gladiator geek going, "We came here to Crockett Promotions to get a fair shake and be in the Crockett Cup. And what happens?" And David, without missing a beat, goes, "You got beat." So the gladiators storm off in a fury, David smiling and trying to pitch back to Tony before we see these guys fucking burn the studio down. And that was their final send-off. I wrote down here to conclude my notes, this is what Chris Jericho attempted to do with that Action Audrey geek on Dynamite months ago, but epically failed. And it sure did wonders for that guy since. Where the hell's he been at? Rampage, apparently. Or Dark. This was an awesome end to the show. The Mulkey brothers have been a constant rib on this program since the beginning. Now I think I know why Jim Cornette's been having a blast taking shots at those guys any chance he gets. Turns out that they're about to make a storyline out of the Mulkey brothers getting a fluke win. Hey, it's something for the undercard geeks. I imagine it goes south in a hurry, but for one night, it was great. I laughed at this. I had a lot of fun. Literally had fuck all to do with the Crockett Cup, but still one of the best finishes to a Crockett episode we've seen this year. I give it 5 stars. 6.5 if they would have shot it in the Tokyo Dome. But let's switch gears and move over to the Sportatorium, which was also not in the Tokyo Dome. Pretty close, though. Give or take 7,000 miles. But in completely unrelated news, as we move to this episode of World Class, here's my first note for the show. Happy birthday, Mike Von Erich. I believe he would have been 20 years old at this time. 1984, right? Yeah, let's see. I think he died in 87. Mike Von Erich. Yep. He was 23 when he died. God, that stings just thinking about it. 23 years old, man. literally 3 years after David's unexpected death. I mean, they don't call it the Von Erich family tragedy for nothing. But the reason I bring Mike up was that he was part of the Encore presentation this week. They replayed the match with him and Michael Hayes from a few weeks back. I think I remember joking at the time, one of the few Freebirds Von Erich pairings they actually booked by this period that had not already been done 14,000 times over. You know, as easy as it is to target Mike when you talk about the hierarchy of the Von Erich brothers, pitting him up against Hayes was probably one of the better combinations they could have done. You got Mike that's pretty fresh to the Dallas region by this point. Obviously, the fans were very receptive for him. You know, by now, Hayes and the Freebirds were coming out to the Bad Street USA music, so it added some extra heat for Hayes when he would come out and strut and act like a dick. But even when I watched this back on a second go-around, they laid it out so perfectly with Mike getting in the early shine, pulling out some surprise moves on Hayes and getting him frustrated. And obviously with Hayes being the veteran, he was able to lure Mike in and getting some occasional cheap shots to take the advantage. You know, we all remember they ended up doing the brief ref bump with Mike colliding into Bronco Lubick. Bronco taking the best bump he possibly could for being borderline immobile. And when Hayes thought he had the win in the bag, Mike was able to roll him through at the end, cradle him in a sunset pin, and steal the win. It was a great upset win for Mike. The crowd obviously went ballistic for it. Hayes sold it great. You know, like I mentioned when we reviewed it in the first go-around, it was the ideal layout for young babyface rookie versus heel veteran. You know, Michael Hayes knew exactly what kind of match to have. I mean, you're never going to get anything flashy with the guy, but he really knows how to get the most out of essentially nothing. You wonder sometimes, it's almost as if a younger generation would benefit from learning a thing or two by watching his tapes. But, you know, maybe that's just wishful thinking on my end. Thinking the young bucks are going to take advice from the veterans of the business. I'm not referring explicitly to the Jackson brothers. I'm just saying the young guys in the business. But they also had a nice little video reel showing Kevin Von Erich visiting one of those non-profit children's organizations. I think they called it the Dallas Society for Crippled Children. It was a really sweet video. You had Kevin hanging out with some kids, looked like a classroom. They're all excited to be with him. You know, he's holding one of them on his lap. It's simple white meat babyface stuff. You know, the Von Erichs were always great at doing the local charity stuff. You know, everybody in Dallas knew who they were if they had a subtle clue what professional wrestling was. And again, it just brings you back to a time as a wrestling fan when things used to be simple. Babyfaces were babyfaces. Heels were heels. There were no shades of gray with anything. Can you imagine AEW's top babyfaces doing shit like this in 2023? Christ almighty, could you see them trying to do this stuff with the oil mechanic? God, Moxley and charity work for company publicity. Yeah, that wouldn't get over. Not unless he's teaching kids how to fucking blade. Well, I digress. How about this next match, though? The Battle of the Blondes. Get this. Mr. Long, Tan, and Handsome, Chick Donovan, versus Buddy Roberts of the Freebirds. Dang. If only they didn't shave Buddy's head last year. Probably could have grown his hair out to this length of Donovan's. They could have had a classic style and profile session where the fans got to decide who had the better head of hair. Clearly it was Chick Donovan in this case. Same goes with the physique. I believe we also covered this a couple weeks back, but, Chick Donovan was another newbie that showed up to the Dallas scene recently. He had one brief TV squash, but nothing fancy or extensive like the match he had with Buddy here. This was a match that they actually went to the time limit draw for, which gave him a little bit of more of a window to showcase Donovan's offense. They really didn't do all that much in terms of building suspense. A lot of the match was back and forth between both guys. Buddy had the advantage toward the end, so he kept trying to stall for time by dumping Chick out to the floor and trying to stay on offense. And with about 15 seconds left, Chick tried to mount some offense on Buddy, but the bell rang before he could secure a pinfall. Basic stuff. Good way for them to potentially build to a rematch down the pike. I really don't know that much about Chick Donovan's career, so in terms of his Dallas run, I can't really provide any insider input. Not really sure a lot of what he was involved with in the territory or what his major feuds consisted of, but, I presume they gave him a little bit of a push in the mid-card before he moved on. But I don't really have much to add beyond that for now. It was a fine match, but nothing really to take home. Then the next match was Jimmy Garvin versus Mike Von Erich. And yet again, for about the 100th time we get a segment or a match involving Jimmy Garvin, because Precious is at ringside with him, the fans are more interested in seeing her fight Sunshine. One of those rare moments in wrestling where the girls actually outclass the guys. But in terms of match layout, it was very similar to the Michael Hayes match we talked about. It was all Mike early on, out-wrestling and outpacing Garvin, trying to stall for time on the floor to avoid Mike. There was one brief moment in this match that caught me off guard and left me with my jaw hanging. Not directly relating to anything going on in the ring. I'd say probably 3 or 4 minutes into this thing, the floor cam cut to a shot of a young black woman in the front row. Swear to God, as God is my fucking witness, I am not making this up. This is what actually happened on camera. They cut to the shot of this woman. She appeared to be holding a naked baby doll with a long blonde wig on. The doll was also hanging with what appeared to be a noose around its neck. I also think there were red paint blotches on there too, possibly to signify blood. Sure shit. I'm not high. I'm not making this up. I watch these programs sober. You don't believe me? Go try to find a clip of it. You'll see it in broad daylight. I could not make heads or tails of that. I think the baby doll was supposed to be Michael Hayes. Maybe. Perhaps. Either that or this woman had some serious counseling she needed to deal with. Aside from that wonky 3 seconds of TV, which I'll never be able to get out of my head for as long as I live, it was also probably the most notable thing on the entire program looking back. The match just kind of chugged along, and right as Garvin was taking over on Mike, who should start making his way down the aisleway but good old Chris Adams. And as we've been following with the Garvin Adams story, Adams had been sporting Garvin's stolen ring gear. So he comes out smiling, he's strutting and trying to imitate Jimmy Garvin. Slightly less impressive than Cornette's impersonation of him, but the crowd likes seeing it. And it's at this point where Garvin sees Adams coming around ringside with his gloves and robe on that he decides to throw Mike Von Erich over the top rope for the blatant DQ. And as he turns his attention over to calling out Adams, Mike comes back in and starts attacking Garvin. He ends up getting dumped out to the floor so Adams could then walk into the ring to raise Mike's hand. And once again, Garvin has been humiliated, devastated, and dilapidated. at the hands of Chris Adams. This week for essentially doing nothing. All he had to do was walk down the aisleway, and that was enough for Garvin to not only get himself intentionally DQ'd, but also to turn his attention away from Mike long enough to get tossed out to the floor and thwarted again in his efforts to regain possession of his robe and gloves. It's actually a really funny story on the surface if you think about it. The whole thing is, Jimmy Garvin is making a concerted effort to steal back his ring gear, but he keeps failing because he's an idiot. No, really, it's like a real-life take on the Roadrunner Wile E. Coyote bit. Garvin just keeps on getting made to look like a jackass every week, and all Adams has to do is show up and wait for Garvin to put his foot in his mouth. Exactly how it should be done. The heels being stupid, and the babyfaces looking smart. So this is great. We'll just pretend the bloody baby doll thing didn't happen, because I don't really have a rational explanation for that one. But then came time for the main event. A mildly bizarre, unexplainable scenario of heel versus heel. You know, they hyped this up on last week's show, and I didn't really address it because, I don't know, I just kind of put it in the back of my memory. But I remember when they threw the graphic up for this, I thought, well, that's kind of odd. The match is Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy versus Kamala and the Missing Link, accompanied by Skandar Akbar. And if you've been paying attention to the Dallas reviews, you would know that both of these teams have been heels on television. Akbar's crew's been working the on and off feud with the Iceman, even though Kamala hasn't been on Dallas programming in quite a while, actually. So when I saw they announced this as a featured match for the show, I'm like, okay, so who do I cheer for? To be honest, I don't really think we ever got an answer to that. They subsequently, and by they, I mean Bill Mercer, he announced that next week we would also be seeing a 6-man tag match with the Freebirds going up against Kamala, Link, and one of the Super Ds. And in terms of this match, it was kind of a wild brawl scenario. You know, both teams went at it from the opening bell. Devastation Inc.'s team ended up gaining the advantage and working over Hayes for the heat, if you can even call it that. And it actually spawned the Dallas faithful to start a Go Hayes Go chant, which I couldn't believe. I was like, so they literally go from a replay in Seg 1, where Michael Hayes is the most hated man on the face of the planet, to by the time we get to the main event of this show, he's the number one babyface. And of course, Gordy gets the hot tag at the end. The crowd's going electric for that. Things end up breaking down into pandemonium by the end. There's a brief miscommunication spot where Devastation Inc. tried to do a double-assisted splash on Hayes, but that didn't go according to plan. Gordy ended up giving a big dive onto one of the heels. And by the time Akbar got himself involved, that's when the bell rang and everything started breaking down with the Freebirds and Akbar's guys. So there's a street fight going on in the ring. And man, what a great swerve this was. This is one of those classic TV moments that probably gets swept under the radar, unfortunately. But you watch this back in real time and you're like, oh wait, are we about to see an unlikely alliance? Well, allow for me to elaborate. So what happens is, the Freebirds are fighting with Devastation Inc., but they end up getting quickly overwhelmed because the numbers advantage. So some of the baby faces start filing out from the locker room. And who should be among those list of baby faces to come to the aid of the Freebirds but the Von Erich brothers? Here comes Mike, here comes Kevin, and here comes Kerry. They clear the ring of the Devastation Inc. guys, and that leaves the Freebirds and the Von Erichs to stand across the ring. They're staring each other down. Time freezes. Both teams stand their ground. And at first, it looked like cooler heads were about to prevail. Hayes gives the sign to Gordy and Buddy to leave. They turn their backs. But the problem is, the Von Erichs momentarily let their guard down. And wouldn't you know it, that slimeball Michael Hayes pulled a fast one. Because when the Von Erichs turn their backs, that's when the Freebirds jump them from behind and kick them out of the ring. Or at least they try to. And that backfires because the Freebirds end up getting fought off. They take a powder. The Von Erichs are standing tall. I was like, God damn it. Should have known better than to think the Freebirds were actually going to side with the Von Erichs and let them go free. How could I forget? Stupid me. This is the most heated rivalry in the history of world-class wrestling. They wouldn't just arbitrarily decide on a TV episode to have the Freebirds and the Von Erichs stand side by side, even if they had a common enemy in the Devastation Inc. crew. Silly me to forget that. They got me. But it was a very clever angle. I dug that finish a lot. You know, there were definitely some highlights on this one. Yeah, they're still building up to the Texas Stadium show in May, which they're still a little ways out. So that card hasn't fully come together as of yet. But as you see things starting to shape up for that card, you know, Kerry and Kevin are still being considered both for the world title shot with Ric Flair, even though we already know who winds up getting the title shot. But all in all, give this one a solid thumbs in the middle, tilting slightly up. So, yeah. I think that about rounds everything out here. All right, so quick update. From the time I did my WrestleMania preview on the Monday show, I read a report somewhere that apparently this WrestleMania card has actually been, well, somewhat set in stone now. I think I remember on the preview, we had like one match announced for night 2, like 1 or 2 matches announced for night 1, and then everything was kind of just hanging out on the to-be-confirmed list. But, yep, as of this current recording, this page has been updated, and it looks like we have 7 matches announced for night 1 and 6 matches announced for night 2. So on the Saturday show, we got Austin Theory and John Cena in the opening match. Seth Rollins and Logan Paul is announced for that night. Trish, Lita, and Becky versus Damage Control. That's going to be on night 1. The men's WrestleMania Showcase Fatal 4-Way, which I'm probably going to skip over. That's going to be on that card. Charlotte and Rhea, it's on night 1. The Usos versus Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn is also on night 1. And Ray versus Dom is also on night 1. That's still going to be a toss-up between which match ought to main event night 1. People are probably thinking it's going to be the women's match. From a booking perspective, I would put the Usos and the Owens-Zayn match to main event night 1, but that's just me. And then for night 2, we have the 3-way IC title match. We have Edge and Priest in the Hell in a Cell. Edge and Finn Balor in the Hell in a Cell match. We have the women's Fatal 4-Way Showcase, which, again, will probably be my designated piss break. We got Bianca Belair and Asuka for the Raw Women's title. Brock Lesnar versus Omos, which sounds horrifically entertaining. Trainwreck level bad. Actually kind of looking forward to that one, sadistically. And of course, we all know that Roman and Cody is going to main event night 2. So there you go. On the surface, doesn't really seem like a whole lot. Provided this is the full card and they don't try to announce anything between now and tomorrow. But 7 matches for night 1 and 6 matches for night 2. Hey, you know what? It's doable. I still don't really like the idea of a 2-night WrestleMania event, but at least they're not going to try to cram 9 or 10 matches on both cards, because that's just going to be overkill. It doesn't seem as if they're going to be doing any pre-show material or anything like that. I mean, if there are, I'd probably just skip over it anyway. But yeah, this is feasible. I can watch 7 matches on the first night, kind of collect my thoughts and talk about that, and then night 2, where we got 6 matches there. It'll be easier to digest the material that way. So, still not a fan of the 2-night WrestleMania deal, but I prefer them doing 6 or 7 matches as opposed to 13 or 14 in one given night. So, we'll see. Like I said, the card is hit and miss for me. Some of it I'm looking forward to. Others I'm just kind of ambivalent about. However, sometimes WWE manages to pull up surprises. So even matches that I don't have a lot of high expectations for, sometimes they manage to exceed expectations. So maybe there'll be a handful of those. It is WrestleMania. The presentation aspect always kind of takes priority over everything else. So maybe I'll get swept up in the production value of it. I forget, where is this? This is in Hollywood, right? I think the tagline was WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. Yeah, California. So SoFi Stadium. So there you go. Attendance-wise, I don't really know what the capacity is. I don't know how many tickets sold for this thing either, so it's kind of hard to judge one way or the other what it's going to be in terms of overall numbers. But we'll see. It's going to be a packed house, as it always is with WrestleMania. It is one of those odd wrestling showcases where even people that aren't particularly big fans of wrestling will just go buy tickets to see it just for the extravaganza nature of it. So, there you have it. But in any case, we will be back on Monday for a very, very packed show. Got a lot of preparation to get to beforehand, and I still got to watch Retro Raw. And again, I talked about this on the Monday show, but there will not be a SmackDown review on Monday, so don't be taken aback by that. We'll have plenty to talk about, though, so don't you worry. All right, I think that's all I got for this one. So, thanks for watching. Take care. Peace out.